deaf culture? Nobody better to ask than Dr. Spano, a child of deaf adults.
I'm Tony Spano. I'm the music teacher here at Culver City High School and the co-executive director of the Academy of Visual and Performing Arts. And this is my 19th year at Culver City High School.
The world from above as it turns to the
He lost his hearing when he was very young, kind of ear infections. There were 7 total kids, but he was the oldest, and they didn't know what to do, and there weren't regular schools around. His parents didn't want his siblings to learn sign language. They wanted them just to talk and have him lip read. So I think it's always been hard for him to communicate with his siblings. I mean, they get along and they can lip read, and at worst, he can always write notes. And so she could talk more and lip read more just because of the schools that she went to, which I think were probably pretty progressive for the time, because they were mainstreaming and mixing hearing impaired and hearing students together. Well, it's always been interesting because, to think of ASL as a language, I think some places count it as a foreign language, which is interesting because it's not a foreign language, but it is a different communication. I consider it that it's a language, but I understand that it's kind of what I would call a graphic language. Like in music we have notation, we also have graphic notation that kind of shows more in a picture way, and sign language can do that. It's sometimes can be very representational of something, like the sign for girl, which was meant to be kind of blush, is like on the cheek, and a boy was this, which is like a baseball cap. So it's like kind of representing objects or people. And I know it certainly has its own grammar, which is a little bit different than regular English, and so it's certainly a debate. But I think people in a lot of schools do recognize it as a language that a student can learn and use and count towards their requirements that way.
love so fine.
Well, growing up with both my parents being deaf and being in the deaf community, I mean, it's like any other cultural group. They tend to gravitate to each other. They tend to be socialized with each other because obviously it's very easy to communicate. And I could see, when my parents, we would go to family functions, and especially my mom would kind of feel like it was harder to communicate with other people. So it's kind of sometimes being left out, not being aware of all the conversations and all the things going on, because not everything would be directed, and certainly not everything would be, for lip reading, directed at her to see.
My head is stuck in the clouds.
Well, I felt like, I was their communicator. I had to make phone calls for them or translate basically for them. And I'm sure a lot of students whose parents don't speak English feel the same way. They're communicating, they're translating, they're helping them take care of whatever communication needs they have. So I certainly felt that I was helping them as a bridge to the hearing world, because otherwise it would be either difficult or hard to have to write everything out or anything like that. So I felt like it was an important role for me to do that. If people were to call my parents disabled or handicapped, I wouldn't feel that way. I don't look at them that way at all. They happen to have a hearing impairment, but to me, they could drive, they could work, they had a normal life, they could communicate, just in a different way. It just was normal, and that was just life, and it wasn't, you didn't look at it as a disability. It just, you might have challenges, but that was normal. So I think, certainly the evolution of how, disabled, handicapped, different labels for it has evolved, and kind of looking at it in a positive light and not a negative light, that it's not a bad thing, it's just a different something differently abled, or different labels that they want to put on it, that it is just a natural thing for each individual. And yes, there might be challenges, but that shouldn't prevent them from being able to do anything.
will subside. All your tears will dry.
Hello. So I'm Carly. What are your names?
I'm Janae.
Janae.
Jamani.
Nice to meet you guys.
Carly.
So when I say deaf culture or deaf person, what is the first association that comes to your mind?
Handicap.
Well, I'm partially deaf, so that comes to mind for me. And being cut off from music is probably, the thing that resonates with me the most.
I don't know off the top of my head. Disability.
Guide dogs. Just someone that can't hear me.
Yeah, a deaf person. My deaf friend from high school. I don't know.
All right, that's fair. How comfortable would you be communicating with a deaf person? Like, do you know any sign language or anything about the culture or anything like that?
And a turtle.
Oh, is that the sign for turtle?
I don't know.
I wouldn't know any sign language, so I wouldn't feel that comfortable.
No, probably the same.
I wouldn't necessarily feel uncomfortable. However, there would be that barrier because I don't know sign language. But it wouldn't make me uncomfortable in a sense of me being afraid or, anything of that nature. It's just that barrier.
I feel like if I were to come in contact with someone, I think it would probably trigger me to learn, the sign language. I took a class, actually, but it was so difficult for me, and I don't really resonate because I can, speak and I can hear. So I think it's kind of like interesting how it can trigger someone to probably want to learn sign language so you can get to know or build a connection with that person, Yeah. I think the connection is lost because you don't know. Yeah. I don't feel uncomfortable, though.
I would say that we're more cognizant about facing each other because body language helps facilitate conversation. So, things like if someone has their back to you and they're talking, you may pick up some of it, you may pick up none of it, especially if there's background noise. And I think that can feel frustrating to the person that's talking to you because sometimes you can hear clear as a bell and sometimes you can't hear anything they're saying. And I think that it can generate frustration on both sides.
Would you say it's important for the hearing world to kind of get in touch with and communicate with deaf people so that they don't feel like isolated or left out?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're all people at the end of the day, and not only that, but you never know, you may have a child who is deaf. So instead of waiting until that moment where, you have your child and you're like, oh, they're deaf, so now I need to learn, why not start early and build that connection? And you might meet someone who you were missing out on because of that barrier. So I think it's important that you don't wait until a tragedy or, something of that nature to learn and embrace people who have disabilities or differences.
I concur with her as far as like you might have a child that might come, and I think that as a humanity, people should all like step out of their comfort zone and explore like different things for people who have all these different elements, because you never know what could happen one day. You might save someone's lives, you might make their day better because you'll be able to communicate with them. And then like if you have children, you probably want them to explore all these different realms of like help and stuff like that. So I agree, it's important.
No, I think they definitely should. It should probably be in schools, to be fair. It should probably be taught at an early age, and then everyone knows.
Yeah, I think the same. It's just the practicalities of actually doing that and getting people on board with doing that, because unless they know people, they're probably not going to want to do that kind of thing, are they? But I think they should. It's worth doing, obviously.
It's very important. It's communicating in general, whether you can hear or not.
Well, thank you so much for interviewing me, and I have a pamphlet if one of you wants to take it, just some resources for learning about deaf culture and anything like that. So, there you are. Thank you. I'll need it. Thank you. Bye.